Welcome to In This Mad World with Andrew Marshall and Chelsea G, looking at the world beyond the headlines. All right, welcome to In This Mad World. This is our 20th episode, Chelsea.
That's so crazy.
Not crazy.
That feels insane.
Yeah, we launched this October 2024. I think late October.
Yeah.
And so this is several months later.
Yes, we're almost like
8.
Well, not like we're almost at a year.
You're getting there.
We're getting there, which is like crazy because we started our topic about Gaza, and here we are talking about it still, and it's still just as horrific.
For full circle, it's getting worse.
Yeah,
it's getting worse.
It's like worse.
Yeah,
but it's kind of like all the things that they promised they were going to do. Like when I say they, Israel, they are doing.
Yeah,
I think we all thought like, oh, maybe there'd be hope. But hope seems like a weird word these days.
It sure does. Seems like more like a mental illness.
Yes.
So our previous episode, we took kind of a big in-depth overview look at what was happening in the lead up to the end of the ceasefire and all that. We're not going to take you through a day by day here, but there are a few days that we have to look at in this month of May. Incidentally, we are recording this episode on May 25th.
Yes.
So everything is very timely with this. Things change and accelerate on a day-by-day basis. So since we last did our recording and we were talking about we don't know if there's going to be a ceasefire because Trump was in the region at the time.
Yeah.
And there was so much speculation in the press and leaks in the media about a rift between Trump and Netanyahu. And we don't know if Trump was going to force a deal.
Yeah.
And that did not happen. That did not happen at all. Quite the opposite happened, in fact. The war has only accelerated, and the U.S. is clearly a party to the conflict and very much involved. And all the leaks and talk of a rift have kind of faded. And it's more open criticism from other countries, other Western countries, but the U.S. has been a bit silent while Israel pushes its new visions for Gaza. You have visions being pushed by the cabinet, by the IDF, the military, and by the settler leadership. Much, though not all of these visions overlapping.
Like the settler leadership, I can't even handle it.
They are
just put those two words together. And it's and they're think they have any say. It's just crazy.
Oh, they do. They do.
I know that they do, but it's just nuts. The amount of power that they have, right?
It's crazy.
So interesting because it's Trump wants to give power to all these people, but yet he seems to be actively arresting people that are U.S. citizens that just look different than what he classifies as American. It's just but yet you're totally fine, allowing it to just send on over settlers to another country and allowing them to continue to take. It's insane.
Yeah. Sorry.
Everyone obviously knows lots of those settlers have come from America.
Oh yes,
I'm not saying extending, but it's the reality is you're he's supporting that situation over there, and then he's actively ramping up ICE raids in the U.S. to deport people consistently. So it's you obviously it's just so odd to he just such a contradiction. This man, everything he does,
well, that's
even
not
Netanyahu,
a contradiction.
Right?
That's the same side of the same coin. It's not even the other side. It's
I guess so though, but not really, because it's there's Americans there. He's deporting people who are American citizens, and he's also getting rid of Gazans, and allowing settlers to take over. So I guess in a way it is the same.
Yeah, because it's just it's colonial fascists.
Yeah, in my mind, I'm he's trying to make America because the way he promotes it, right, is
I see what you're saying. I feel like what you're getting at here is the promotion of of Trump's vision of America first, but also Israel.
Yeah, like it's like none of this is making sense. Like it's like this is all so
Yeah,
weird.
it is
And it's
very
like
weird. It
the
is
people
very
that were
strange.
shot in DC.
Correct. Yeah.
Like it's just like this is all getting like I'm like this is so unhinged and like your biggest concern is like a crypto party. Like it's like I'm just like it's what world are we living in? It feels like a dystopia.
It is a
Yeah.
dystopia. Yeah,
Anyways, that was my
we've gone
tangent
past
there.
we've gone past the feels like,
Yeah.
and we are fully in the realized dystopian world.
Yes.
Um,
It's wild.
and it is wild. And one thing that is also noticeable is just how, especially in the past few weeks, things have gotten that we are, well, as the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres put it recently, we are entering the cruelest phase of a cruel war in Gaza. And this is indeed the cruelest and most cynical phase of this war. Really, this month of May has been a big turning point for Gaza. And it's interesting to note how, by and large, so much of the population in the West has just kind of like had Gaza fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like, it's kind of like Ukraine, like we're done hearing about that now. We heard about that last year.
Yeah.
And a little bit at the end of the year before that. And our empathy is all used up.
They're like, oh, you stop. Like, call on us next year. Once they give it out once a year.
Let us know what war starts next year that
Yeah.
we can,
We'll be sure
change an icon on social media.
Yes. For like
to
only a
express.
week, though.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
If
Meta doesn't ban it.
Exactly. So, Meta being the parent company of Facebook. FYI.
Yeah. Yes.
So, yeah, we are at this weird conjunction where things are seemingly getting worse. Well, not seemingly. They are getting worse on basically a daily basis. And there is a change taking place among some Western countries. I don't want to get too into this at the beginning of this discussion, but just to note that there is some change taking place, and yet the populations seem to be almost more, what's the word I'm looking for? Not apathetic, although I guess that's part of it, but just less involved, less aware, less caring. So there is a bit of a contradiction there in terms of our governments finally starting to at least sound a little more humane,
concerned.
While our populations are kind of like tapped out. By and large.
And I also think there's just like so many, it's like there's, and that's the thing, right? Like I agree. And then there's things that are going on that feel like truly impact them more personally, even though they're still not even on the same scale. So then I also noticed like even just like our usual news over here starts to talk about it less. It becomes like a banner at the bottom of a news segment that's like talking to us about something that it's like, oh my gosh, like the FBI director says that fentanyl is coming from Vancouver and the north border is the problem. And it's like, oh my gosh, but like 14,000 kids might die in Gaza from starvation is like a bottom line banner over like something that a joke of like a government official person says. Like no one takes anything over here serious anymore. Like in Canada, when I say over here. But
no, it's crazy. So we're just as a quick recap, when the ceasefire broke down and the war restarted, it was like March 19th, 18th, 19th.
Yeah, 19th, I think.
Yeah, when it was relaunched. And then it was, slowly building up, but it was at the start of May that Israel announced they're calling up tens of thousands of reservists. So they're getting ready for a big invasion.
Invasion.
Like a ground force to go.
So like right now they're still bombing actively, but this would be like
they've had a ground force in. Well, they've had a ground force in since March. They did relaunch a ground invasion like pretty rapidly. after they started the war, but it was, a more concentrated ground force. It wasn't a massive reserve army. But now, in fact, actually just yesterday, so May 24th, they called up all of their standing brigades and forces to be mobilized into Gaza. So that you're talking about tens upon tens of thousands of soldiers now being mobilized for deployment into Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, in early May, that they were announcing the calling up of reservists, they also announced the establishment of a new humanitarian aid plan. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but which would effectively militarize humanitarian aid and put it under the control of Israel and the United States.
Which is like insane.
Yes. Instead,
we all see how they care about, people who rely on aid.
Well, exactly. And instead of it operating through all the aid agencies and UN agencies who have been doing this for decades and know how to do it, and who have all denounced the plan and refused to engage with it.
Yeah.
But then on May 5th, we had Israel's Security Cabinet. That's the cabinet, cabinet within the cabinet that deals with security issues. And they approved a massive expansion of the war, and the war's name now is called Operation Gideon's Chariots. It was...
I just can't.
This plan involves essentially a full occupation of the Gaza Strip, along with the forced quote-unquote evacuation, which is another word for expulsion, of the Palestinian population from the north down to the south. Again,
like this is not this is like how many times they've done this, and it's just like it's so crazy to really think about the size of Gaza, like the fact that they're even like gonna
the size of Philadelphia.
Like it's literally the size of Philadelphia, and it has 2.1 million people there. Like before
2.3,
and that's insane. That's like
and
so
now
overcrowded.
Probably 2.1 or 2.
And now you're gonna shove them into a corridor, which would be like I can't even imagine how that would even work.
Yeah. Well, that's
not like none of this is like, I don't know what. It's so difficult because it's not logical. Like none of this is. I feel like we're reliving horrific times.
Well, yes, but we're also moving to all new horrors.
Yes, like new horrors.
It's not like as the IDF said, that this is not about what they were doing before in the past 19 months of war, where they go in with forces, pulverize an area, fight Hamas or other militant groups, then withdrawal, and then forces kind of regroup in those areas. And then they kind of just do that all over the Strip until it's pretty much decimated. But they ultimately have not destroyed Hamas, because you can't destroy a resistance force like that through conventional force.
No,
it hasn't happened. The only way that you can do that is through full extermination of the population.
Yeah.
You can't target and exterminate a fighting force when it's part of like an indigenous resistance movement.
Yes.
Like this is lessons we learned in Vietnam, in Kenya, in Malaya, in
like so many times over, and here we are still.
Exactly. So the IDF announced that
it's like, how do these people become leaders? Like it's like so crazy.
So the IDF announced that the plans involve the conquering the Strip and holding the territory. So they're no longer going in and withdrawing; they're going in and maintaining their presence. And part of this, the new humanitarian aid plan, is a part of this military plan. The Security Cabinet also approved it as part of their overall approval of this military operation. And hi, Forbes.
My show is short. Okay, one sec.
So the approved military plan by the Security Cabinet involves this aid humanitarian plan. which establishes a new organization called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF, which was only registered in Switzerland earlier this year. The aid world has never heard of it before. They don't know anybody who runs it. Now it's apparently run by an ex-Marine, and it is U.S. Marine, and it is supposed to take over basically what UNRWA, the UN Works and Relief Agency,
that's
was
recognized
doing
worldwide, like that.
Correct.
Everyone knows who they are. They're legitimate.
Alongside all other aid groups that have been operating in Gaza. Yeah. So you're talking about the World Food Program, you're talking about World Central Kitchen, you're talking about Medicines Sans Frontier, Doctors Without Borders, just like the whole cumulative constellation of aid agencies. This agency that nobody's ever heard of and never existed before was founded for the purpose of taking over aid distribution. So the way that UNRWA and other agencies did it was aid trucks would be let in the strip.
Yeah.
And the whole purpose and function of humanitarian aid is to get the food, medicine, and supplies to where the people are.
Yeah.
Right? It sounds very logical, right?
Yeah.
But to do this, UNRWA and other aid agencies set up hundreds, plural, of local like aid distribution spots throughout the strip to make sure that they are close to where people are. Yeah. Because especially in a war zone, you don't want people walking long distances or traveling.
You want to keep it close.
Yeah, you have to bring the aid to them. So this system envisions, instead of 100, 200, 300 distribution points, there are 4. Is what they're starting with.
Side by side, like in one corner?
Well, not far from that. There's 4, and they may go up to 10. Is what it comes down to. And this is, instead of being handled by aid agencies, it's outsourced to U.S. mercenary companies. So the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is run by a former U.S. Marine, and then they have contracted to 2 U.S. mercenary companies, one of which is run by this guy named Phil Riley, who's a 29-year CIA veteran, retired. You always have to, when you hear CIA paramilitary.
Yeah, veteran,
not good. The retired part is always in quotations. Yeah. Also because his company is a merged product of Blackwater, which is the most infamous mercenary company in the world. That goes back to the Iraq War days, where they were killing civilians in Iraq. So Blackwater was a major contractor whose military mercenary company, full of like former U.S. Special Forces soldiers. Its founder, Eric Prince, is from one of the richest families in the United States. They're Christian fundamentalists, billionaire lunatics, who, like, if you go look up Blackwater and its history, you'll find all sorts of really dark, creepy stuff, including discussions where Eric Prince would, pump up his soldiers by telling them they're fighting a holy war against Islam and to kill, and he was a bit of a psycho. Incidentally, his sister was Trump's education secretary in his first term.
Oh my God.
Yeah, Betsy DeVos.
Oh, Betsy.
That's
I
her.
hate Betsy.
She's from the Prince family.
I can still see her face.
Right. So they're basically like American Bin Ladens in terms of like the family role.
I can't stand her.
Where they're like a big billionaire family, very conservative, and then one of them goes off and founds an international terrorist organization. In this case, we call it a mercenary company called Blackwater. Yeah. But anyways, moving back to Gaza and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and Phil Riley and the CIA mercenary outfit. So the idea is that these so-called humanitarian zones, otherwise known as sterile zones, the language alters a bit, but they kind of go back and forth between all these different terms for it. But the idea is that so you set up, say, 4 or 5 zones. They'll all be located in the south, so northern Gaza does not get aid, meaning that people have to move south in order to get the aid. They also have to pass through what are called filtration zones. Now, this is a term that the Russians use
That is
when
not a
they
good term.
no
Not a good term.
when they occupy Ukrainian land and start stealing Ukrainians. They put them through quote unquote filtration camps, where they could be anywhere from a few days to a few months, where they might disappear if you don't pass the filtration process. But it's basically like going through to make sure you don't
Oh
have
my
connections
God.
to military, security, intelligence, that you are a vetted Ukrainian. So in this case, um, it's about finding vetted Palestinians who have no connections to Hamas or militant groups. So they filter them through, and they use in this process biometric identification. So you're talking about facial recognition technology and other biometrics, possibly fingerprints, maybe retina scans, etc. We don't know the full scope
This
of
is
what they're
so
planning yet.
crazy.
Yeah, and so these filtration zones, nobody knows what would happen. Like they've set up a prototype of this um, several months ago to kind of try it out. And when Palestinians went through a filtration zone, oftentimes they would be beaten, tortured, or taken away to secret detention sites and never seen again. That's their filtration zones to the humanitarian zones or sterile zones. And once Palestinians are vetted and taken into this area, they would then pick up their food aid and then go back to so-called secure zones. This is ultimately about moving the Palestinian population down from the north down south. And the next like final phase of the aid distribution system. The Sunday Times, the British paper, published leaked photo from the IDF, which shows uh, this part of this plan, but a plan to basically cordon off, cut Gaza up, and concentrate its population into 3 distinct zones. So I'm just going to share screen here.
Love a good screen share.
Yeah. So here we can see this new division of Gaza. For our listeners, you have basically there are 4 red zones at a big chunk at the very top of the strip, and then 2 chunks in the middle, and then the very bottom, a big thick chunk. And these are closed military areas and corridors. So
Like it's like so wild. Imagine if like what's a city in Canada for our Canadian listeners that we can compare this to so that they get it, like the size.
The size I'd have to look up. I don't know specifically.
Because this is insane. Like it's already such a congested area. Like, and now we're gonna cut it up even more.
Yeah. And so then there's the 3 places in between, which are deemed to be civilian areas. And so the military areas, in the north, they already have a vast buffer zone. So incidentally, all around Gaza is a designated buffer zone. Now, this is actually part of Gaza, but since the war began, the military has pushed in about a mile or 2 in some areas into what they call a buffer zone, which runs along the course of Gaza's border with Israel. And that is an area that they have completely bulldozed and decimated. It is a kill zone, is a term for it, but a no-go zone. A lot of those places contained like agriculture and farms and farmland and all this stuff. It's all gone. Anybody who unfortunately had homes within 1 or 2 miles of the border, that's all gone. So that's part of the buffer zone. And then they built, starting in 2024, further corridors is what they call them. So you have in this in northern Gaza, separating Gaza City from the middle of Gaza, you have what's called the Netzarim corridor, and this is named after a former Israeli settlement that was in Gaza and that was evacuated in 2005, called the Netzarim settlement, and they named this corridor after it, where they basically bulldoze their way right across Gaza from Israel to the Mediterranean Sea, and they cut about a 2-mile wide, again, a buffer zone in this corridor. They paved a road through it called the Netzarim Road, and they started building Israeli military bases in there and outposts, so that they can engage in rapid deployment north and south of this corridor. But it also becomes a point to manage the flow of people north and south of Gaza.
Yeah.
So it covers the two main north-south roads.
Yeah.
One that goes along the coast and one that comes down from Gaza City, more in the middle. You can actually see that in this image. It's the main white road.
Yeah, it's that main white road.
Correct.
And it's basically a sniping road. Like, if you're realistic about it, like if anyone sees, like, there was a lot of movement on that main road, right, from north to south, like down.
These are the roads where we have seen most of the images of people walking in either mass displacement south or returning during the ceasefire. Towards the north.
There was that big famous like archway, right? Wasn't there an archway leading into the north? I remember like there was like a little spot where you got to the north.
There might be one along the coastal road. I'm not too sure about the archway, but these are there's the two main roads.
The main roads,
that go north. And in order to get to northern Gaza, you have to go through the Netzarim corridor, which means you have to basically, this becomes a filtration point for the Israeli military. And then later.
Wait, can I ask you a question? So would that be kind of same to like what they have? So like for our listeners you've heard us talk about the West Bank before. So that's not Gaza, but that's still another area that it has Palestinians living in it, that's contained. And you know how they have those checkpoints and they can like get through. Would those be kind of like filtration sections?
Yes. So, but obviously because we're talking Gaza, we're talking about it on a
whole other level.
Yeah, kind of larger scale, because
military.
Yeah, I mean, it's still the military, the IDF, that manages all the checkpoints in the West Bank.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's still, it's basically, they're effectively, plotting out a West Bank-esque occupation for Gaza. And not that they haven't done it before, but there are plans that actually go back to the early 1970s. Ariel Sharon, former general and former prime minister, who was part of the same party as Netanyahu, the Likud party, but ultimately left, and Netanyahu was far to the right of him. But Sharon's nickname was the bulldozer, and he was understood to be the closest politician to the settlers in Israel, and was fought in every war in Israel's history, and was quite a brute. He described this as the 5 fingers strategy, where you cut up Gaza into 5 pieces.
Okay, yes.
And then you sort of like divide it that way, and then you can rule them as basically little territories.
Territories, yes.
There have been other terms given to this in military planning. Some call it the bubbles strategy, where you have these little islands or bubbles of Palestinians where they can live, and then outside of those territories are where the IDF fights Hamas, and it's basically a wasteland. But you just have these little bubbles and pockets.
And what a beautiful life you're trying to bring into this world. Like the plan you have, like it sounds horrific.
Right. So so this strategy is like had different iterations.
Yeah.
But the one now that they're seemingly settling on is the one that's driven by this humanitarian project. So, which is why, earlier I
I feel like
mentioned
they
where,
think because they put the name humanitarian on it, like people might be like, "Oh, this is going to be good."
but that's the thing. That's why I mentioned earlier this is the most cynical phase, in addition to being the most cruel,
Mm-hmm.
because we're effectively now implementing. Actually, Netanyahu said it today or yesterday that this plan and part of the longer term plan, we are implementing Trump's plan
Mm-hmm.
for basically ethnically cleansing Gaza and turning it into a Riviera resort. That aspect, will is basically a fantasy. It's going to be
Yeah.
like Riviera of crazy Israeli settlers, but
Yes.
they're planning to settle it, and they've been, making those plans since uh, the war began.
Oh yeah, like for so long. I
Yeah,
remember seeing like interviews, truthfully, like before like this last like the October 7th attack. Like I remember like seeing settler interviews, like talking about how like the end goal is always to have them out of like to remove them.
yeah,
Yeah.
the
There's like
Palestinians.
one crazy one. Like there's like one wild settler. She's like a woman.
Daniela Weiss. Yeah,
Yeah. She in her interviews are like because she's a leader, right?
she is. Yep, she's a
Yeah.
leader of
And her
major settler
interviews
organizations.
are unhinged.
Yeah, I mean, she's one of the more honest.
Yeah, like and that's the thing. She doesn't lie at all about her plan or their plans. Like but she'll say it however you want to
Yeah,
say it. But this is what we plan on doing.
yeah. She features pretty prominently in a recent documentary called "The Settlers" from BBC from I forget his name, but a renowned documentary filmmaker who just um, put out that documentary, and well worth watching. Her interviews are
Is that the one
pretty
that
enlightening.
BBC just like removed? Because there's a documentary that is like they were talking about that BBC is like removing and not going to play. That's about Gaza. No, that's the Burning Medics. There's a new one coming out.
Oh no, I don't know that one. No,
I'll
this
tell
was
you.
Louis Theroux's "The Settlers."
Okay, because I'll tell you about the other one next. But BBC won't play it.
Well, shocker. There you go. But so they seem to be now channeling their efforts toward, this particular aid program, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and it's kind of an amalgam of a lot of these different strategies. And so the Washington Post actually just the other day published a report based upon a lot of internal documents that hadn't been before seen about this organization and about its planning. And one of the things that stood out to me the most was how at the far end of this planning, so you have the whole humanitarian sterile
Yeah.
zones, everything like that, the aid distribution now under the control of mercenaries being guarded by the IDF. God. Yeah, there's literally layers to it because they realize that we can't have the IDF being the face of this and running it up front because nobody
It's
will
like real
trust that.
Hunger Games right now, man.
Pardon me?
This is like real life Hunger Games.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like zones,
Oh yeah.
It's like
And so the Washington Post reported that eventually Palestinians would, quote, live in guarded compounds that would each house up to tens of thousands of non-combatants, end quote. The internal documents written up by this group acknowledge that they're going to face a lot of criticism from aid agencies, foreign governments, everybody. They even acknowledge that people will be criticizing their plan as, quote, concentration camps with biometrics.
okay, like if you can say that people are going to be saying this and put like it's like and you're telling me you are like protecting like I cannot. Like you're like this is insane.
Yeah. And so the initial plans for this go back to the start of the war. Well, actually, a few weeks after the war began, 2023, you had, because Israeli political leaders weren't necessarily coming out with a post-war plan for what
Plan.
Gaza looks
Yes.
like,
Yes. Yeah.
it was left to others in the military and in Israeli business circles, particularly like tech and surveillance companies, to come up with. They held a series of meetings, coming up with a kind of plan that was the skeletal framework for this one. And then that's when in 2024, they invited in Phil Riley of the CIA, sorry, former CIA.
Get it right, Andrew.
I know, right? To
He's
come
retired.
in. Yeah, exactly. To come in, and they kind of all brainstormed this plan together. And the the purpose of having like the American groups there is to have that be the front, to have them be responsible for distribution, while the IDF would kind of like secure the area in the background. But eventually, the idea is to have these created safe zones where the Palestinians would be, quote unquote, concentrated, is the word that they use, not mine. And what do they call this? The final phase of the plan involving building, quote unquote, guarded residential zones. That's the wording of the Washington Post.
Guarded.
But their term, the internal documents term, was humanitarian transition areas. So this like description, this whole concept, is it actually, we can trace it back about 130, 40 years. It is counterterrorism or counterinsurgency tactics 101. It's also colonial warfare 101.
Yeah, like I was like, definitely colonial.
And those two are basically overlapping. Colonial warfare is very often counterinsurgency warfare, because colonizing powers create insurgencies and then have to deal with them. So if you look at what the US war in Vietnam, for example.
Like I'm like,
in the 1960s, in the early 1960s, they created something called the Strategic Hamlets Program. And in this was their plan to separate the population in southern Vietnam from the communist resistance in southern Vietnam.
Didn't go over well.
Right. But they did this by creating these strategic hamlets, quote unquote, which were little villages that were surrounded by like barbed wire fences and armed units. And they basically vetted the population, the local communities and farmers, who were then pushed into these little villages, which then cut them off not only from theoretically the communists, but from their land. So they couldn't work, they couldn't trade, their whole society collapsed because it wasn't, you're creating ghettos is what you're creating, or concentration camps is another word for it. And the whole program, I think, fell apart in a couple years. And not only that, but it was completely unsuccessful in separating the population from the communist guerrillas. Because of course, guerrilla movements, that's G-U-E-R, not G-O-R.
Yes.
Just for our listeners, guerrilla movements are embedded in, part of, and extensions from populations.
Yeah.
They don't have uniforms necessarily. They don't have like ID cards necessarily that indicate like, I'm a member of Hamas or the Viet Cong or what or the Mau Mau in Kenya, where the British in the 1950s created a whole system of concentration camps across the country, and filtered, quote unquote, hundreds of thousands of Kenyans through them in an attempt, a massive colonial and counterinsurgency war. Nobody knows how many died, but probably hundreds of thousands in that process. Mass unbelievable torture. Carolyn Elkins, a historian, wrote the book Imperial Reckoning, all about Kenya's gulags, or Britain's gulags in Kenya.
It's like, how are we here again?
And that was just in the 1950s.
What was that book called?
It's called Imperial Reckoning.
I'm gonna get that. I'm reading Orwell right now.
1984?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
This is the book. Imperial Reckoning, Carolyn Elkins. The untold story of Britain's gulag in Kenya.
I've made a goal for myself that I'm going to try to read. And for our listeners, I don't read often. I read like obviously the news, and I'm really into politics, and I'll read articles and things, but I'm not always like reading books. And I'm going to try to read 5 books a year that you recommend to me. So I've been making
Well, I'll make
notes
sure
of
they're
them.
good recommendations.
Yes. But Orwell's like my first one I'm starting with, and I'm almost done. And I
Orwell's
literally got
great.
it like last week, and I haven't put it down. And I feel, anyways. So that's my challenge. And our listeners can hold me accountable, and then you can hold me accountable.
Or like, I haven't read fiction in decades, but if and when I do, 1984 is going to be pretty high on my reread list.
Yeah.
There's so much that's so relevant. One of the things, like, apart from his affinity for language and understanding how language can be used and misused, was the concept of the memory hole, where when something is reported, it can be reported, but then it's thrown in the memory hole, so then it's forgotten forever. So reported, but not repeated.
Yes.
And so that basically is the foundation of Western mainstream media.
That's what it's like. That's so funny that you're saying that, because that's exactly how I feel. Like, as I'm reading
100%.
Yeah.
Like, this is why, like, Chomsky talks all about this kind of stuff. Like, this is because Western mainstream media doesn't function how like Russian or Chinese media function, where you have like the state different. and then the state media. Like, it's not the it's not the same thing.
No.
So in that sense, it's more just like because almost all of my information comes from mainstream media, right? But it's I don't necessarily have the same interpretation, let's say, of the mainstream press, in terms of what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
But my information comes from them because that's where the reporting comes from. That's where the facts come from. And though you might have reports in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in the Financial Times, in the Wall Street Journal, in the Sunday Times, blah, 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 where key facts and key pieces of information are reported, but then they're not repeated.
No.
They're forgotten. They're thrown into the memory hole. It's
That's so true.
Our world is Orwell's nightmare realized.
I know. That's how I feel reading it.
Yeah, understandably.
Like, I think that's what I was like trying to say earlier when I was like talking about how like in the West, like people just get so distracted. It's like the reality is like it's like over here, our world is just not like, I feel like reading that, I feel like I'm more aware of how we're in a dystopia over here. Like,
Doublethink.
This is
Doublethink, doublespeak. So doublethink is the idea of holding two contradictory ideas simultaneously.
Like Donald Trump.
Well, yes, exactly. Like everything that's been going on.
Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah.
Like, I was
or
like, just
calling this program a humanitarian program.
Yes.
Is both doublethink and doublespeak, because you're calling something humanitarian when the actual purpose is to displace the population. The actual purpose is ethnic cleansing, and you're calling it humanitarian.
It's insane.
So yeah. And so this whole system, these forms of counterinsurgency, this form, if you go back to the history of concentration camps, and when I say concentration camps, I understand that the immediate thought that comes to mind in most people's head is Nazi Germany, Nazi Auschwitz,
of course,
that whole system of death camps.
Yeah.
So a distinction needs to be drawn. All death camps are concentration camps, but not all concentration camps are death camps. Okay, so concentration camps their origin is in the very final years, essentially, of the 19th century. So in the late 1800s, the imperial powers that developed concentration camps, you have basically three or four countries who kind of started using these in different ways, all at the same time. So you had the Spanish, I believe, were the very first, employing it in the Philippines and in Cuba. And then the Americans, because of the 1898 Spanish-American War, where the U.S. then took over these Spanish colonies and then had to fight counterinsurgency wars, the U.S. then adopted the camp system. But before the U.S. Jumped into the fray, the British then employed them down in southern Africa, in modern South Africa.
Yeah.
And then the perhaps not surprisingly, the country that developed the next phase, and first of all, in these phases, concentration camps were basically just areas. They're basically just giant prison camps or work labor camps.
Oh my God.
So the name concentration is just because you're concentrating a population in a very small area and basically wrapping them around with fences and guards and enclosures. So it's a camp, but it's a prison because you don't have like the infrastructure for tens or hundreds of thousands of people in like normal functioning prison buildings or systems like that. So the camps are a way to deal with the modern world from the perspective of a colonial power and dealing with the issue of resistance to colonialism. So the final fourth country that developed the original concentration camps and evolved them to their next phase of being a little more exterminationist was Germany. And this is pre-Nazi Germany. This is the early 20th century Imperial Germany operating in southern Africa, Namibia especially, where they engaged in what is generally known as, if not the first, one of the first genocides of the 20th century against the Herero people of Namibia and southern Africa, where the German plan to deal with they had a settler colony.
Germans I don't think I knew about this.
Yeah, this is a crazy history, but the Germans had a settler colony in southern Africa, what we call Namibia today, and part of like it developed resistance among the two main indigenous groups there. And the response of the Germans was not only to put them in concentration camps, but ultimately to kill them. And so not only they were working them to death in the camps, but then they would also just expel them into the desert. So just go walk into, knowing full well that, there's no water, there's no anything, it's just death in the desert. So they nearly exterminated these entire indigenous populations just in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. So this is where the concentration camp system comes from. Basically, these 4 colonial powers developing it, learning from each other, all within a few years. And then being applied elsewhere over the years. Obviously, we saw the most extreme form during Nazi Germany. And incidentally, the Nazi German system of concentration camps, you had dozens and dozens of camps all over Europe. Not all of them, not even in the case of the Nazis, was every concentration camp an extermination camp. Because they didn't remember, the policy didn't start out as extermination. The policy started out as expulsion. We want Jews to leave Europe. We want them to quote unquote emigrate. Emigration was the word.
Emigration.
Which is incidentally the word used today that Israelis use to describe what they want to happen to the Palestinians in Gaza. When settler leaders like Itamar Ben-Gvir, who has sanitized his language, like this guy, he's a psycho, but compared to what he was saying and sounding like before he entered government, he has sanitized his language because now he's a lawyer, so he knows. And his phraseology is that we want to encourage quote unquote voluntary emigration. So we can't expel them because that's a crime to say that.
Yes, I've heard him say this.
So we want to encourage, like even when he speaks at the big settler conferences where everybody has known him for decades and knows that he is an extremist racist who wants all the Arabs, they don't call them Palestinians, the Arabs to leave or die, that obviously he's not somebody who talks about voluntary emigration and means that. So they know these are all dog whistles now, right? So he talks about, he's very specific to the audience of settlers. He's like, we have to phrase it as voluntary immigration, and we just make the conditions so terrible that they want to leave. That's voluntary. Anybody else would call that ethnic cleansing and expulsion. And forced displacement.
Let's starve them and make it inhabitable, and then we'll say that they volunteered to leave.
Exactly. That's the logic. Talk about Orwellian, right? Double think, double speak right there.
So crazy.
Voluntary.
And then that's people are just like, you guys stand up for all the Palestinians? You're anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
That's exactly. Like crazy to me.
So the Nazis also had this voluntary emigration idea, but for the Jews of Europe. And so most of their first concentration camps were for political dissidents, for socialists and communists and anarchists and anybody they didn't like, political opponents. And then over time, the concentration camps that they built up in occupied territories in Eastern Europe, particularly Poland and Ukraine and elsewhere, those became like mostly labor camps for Jews. You had the ghettos, and then the ghettos would be cleared out, and the residents sent to concentration camps, where typically they would often be worked to death, and you're obviously treated horribly. And note, like, the Nazi camps were obviously the worst.
Yeah.
But then it was in 1941 that the policy changed from favoring expulsion to favoring extermination, when extermination became the official policy following the Wannsee Conference in early 1941, or late 1941. That is when the policy shifted, and that is when the death camps took on a much more prominent role, first in Poland and then spreading out elsewhere. So most people, when you say concentration camp, their first thought is Auschwitz.
Yeah, they think of the death camps.
Yeah, and that's like what I said. All death camps are concentration camps,
yes,
but all concentration camps are not death
camps.
But there is
like,
a slippery slope.
The one that China has going on right now for the Myanmars, like, that's a concentration camp.
For the Uyghurs.
Yeah.
Not Myanmar, for the Uyghur population.
What? I thought it was from Myanmar.
No, Myanmar is a different country in Southeast Asia.
No, but I thought that they took a bunch of people from there and they placed them into a camp. Why did I think that?
No, I don't know. No, the Uyghurs are in the Xinjiang region of China, which is Eastern China, Western China, and it's a largely Muslim population.
Okay.
And and over the previous 10-15 years, the Chinese have there was actually a violent resistance movement in the area, and so the Chinese cracked down, building probably the most sophisticated police state in the world today, but also built a massive camp system. And yes, I think it's accurate to call it a concentration camp system, in which these concentration camps were more oriented towards labor, or what they call re-education.
Yes. Okay. These are the camps. I don't know why I thought the other thing, but this is it, where they're trying to make them, like, they call it re-educating and making.
Correct. Where it's about destroying their culture.
Yes. A residential school.
Residential schools are another example of something that, like, those aren't necessarily concentration camps, but they're in the same category and a part of the same process of colonial domination.
Yeah.
So we come back to Israel today, and we're still in this phase of voluntary emigration, expulsion. But we can see from history how slippery that slope is to becoming extermination. And especially when you're faced with a situation like the Palestinians are being faced with today, where there is a deep desire for them to be expelled on the part of the colonial imperial powers locally, namely Israel and the US. But there is not a corollary of countries and places willing to take them in, willing or ready to take them in, which means that this will only radicalize the Israeli position as we move forward and as this plan advances, which means that you're getting ever closer to that quote unquote logical conclusion of extermination, exterminationist logic. So if we can't get rid of them by voluntary emigration, then there are quote unquote other ways.
Yes.
And so that's why when we see a camp system, which is essentially what this is now being pushed, this humanitarian structure for aid delivery in Gaza, that's ultimately pushing the population into distinct areas, which are going to be militarized encampments, so camps, concentration camps, from which they will distribute what little aid is provided. And the Israelis even acknowledged that in the first many weeks of their plan, they're only going to be feeding a fraction of people in Gaza because they're simply not designing it to support the full Gaza Strip by design, because they want people to come south.
Exactly.
And in case there was any doubt about these plans, the finance minister and settler leader, Bezalel Smotrich, has said that because when they come out with these plans, the settler and right-wing extremists have to clarify to their own base, because when people on the right hear about supporting humanitarian aid for Gaza, they go crazy.
Like, what?
Yeah, they're like, how dare you support our enemies? You know, like that's literally what they talk about. And they go on TV and say, kill babies.
Yeah. And they like literally will block it with their bodies to not allow them to
block
physically
the trucks
block
going in.
the trucks
Correct.
from going in.
Yeah. So
did they like
the
light one on fire or something?
Oh, they did that
like
many,
that?
many times in the past. Yeah, there's a whole activist group called SAV9, TZAV9, which means Order 9 in Hebrew.
And they like attack the
They block aid convoys. They've attacked and burned and destroyed aid. They would unfurl the aid and throw water onto the streets and food, and even attack the drivers of aid trucks.
Yeah.
Like, they're a violent, horrible little group of cretins. And so settler and right-wing leaders then have to explain to their constituency, wait, because they agreed to this humanitarian thing. So they're like, wait, it's not what you think.
Let us read you the real plans.
Exactly. Like, and so Bezalel Smotrich said Israel was, quote, destroying everything that's left of the Gaza Strip. The army is leaving no stone unturned. Here's this quote from him. This was just I think 6 days ago he said this. We are conquering, cleansing, and remaining in Gaza until Hamas is destroyed. We are conquering, cleansing, and remaining. That is like, this is explicit language.
Yeah, like
explicitly criminal language.
Yeah.
Like, it's not only a war crime and a crime against humanity to carry this out, which it obviously is.
Yeah.
It is a crime to say it with intent. Like, if you are a government minister and you're saying we're conquering, cleansing, and like holding territory, that is a war crime to say.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah. And
I almost feel like they must get like bingo marks for every like war crime that they say or like hold to be true, because they are just like no like hold back.
That's for sure. And there's few countries in the world that can compete with them.
Yeah, like I mean, like there's still like it's obviously that there's countries out there that are tacking it up as well. Yeah. But it's like on their level, it's insane.
Yeah.
And they like to consider themselves the democracy of the Middle East. It's like
they're wild. In a civilizational war.
You're not even civil.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and speaking of not civil, so back a few weeks ago, Smotrich also had this to say. Within a few months, we will be able to declare that we have won. Gaza will be totally destroyed. In another 6 months, Hamas won't exist as a functioning entity. The population of Gaza will be concentrated from the Morad corridor southwards. The rest of the strip will be empty. The Gazan citizens will be concentrated in the south. They will be totally despairing, understanding that there is no hope and nothing to look for in Gaza, and will be looking for relocation to begin a new life in other places. That is the finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich. Yeah. And the defense minister, Israel Katz, said the entire Gazan population will be evacuated to areas in southern Gaza while creating a distinction between them and Hamas terrorists. Unlike in the past, the IDF, which is by which he means filtration.
Yeah, filtration.
Right? You're going to vetting.
But it's it's not going to that's not going to be successful. It doesn't work.
It never does. Unlike in the past, the IDF will remain in any territory that is conquered to prevent the return of terrorism and to purge and thwart any threat. But your point is 100% correct. These strategies don't work. They do, however, create mass suffering, and can get even more extreme in terms of their consequences. But you're correct. They don't typically succeed for for at least their stated objectives.
Yeah.
In terms of like filtering the population and separating it from Hamas. Like, imagine yourself living in Gaza. First of all, Hamas has about 40,000 fighters, right?
Yeah.
And in a population of 2.3 million, that's a fraction. However, like they all have, well, a lot of them anyway, who aren't orphans, because that actually turned out to be a lot of the fighters who went in on October 7th were orphans, which gives an indication of where their hatred and anger comes.
And we feel like you're going to just be able to like, because now we got a lot more orphans.
Oh, yeah.
And you think that they're just going to be like, yeah, cool. Like, no.
Yeah. But like, so among all the existing fighters, and not just the fighters, but just members of the political organization, or part of its civil arms, they have family members, they have friends, they have neighbors. How do you separate that? Like, how do you separate?
It's sounding very Berlin Wally almost. Like when they like, because I felt like that was a very like that was
dividing families, separating families,
separating them. Like, and it's society. Like obviously this is way more horrific.
Yeah,
but it's like that. I'm like, here we are again. Like, and this doesn't work. Like, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna happen. Like, but it's like this is crazy. And I feel like they're probably like it's like, I guess kind of in a way like South Korea, North Korea, right? Like there's family that's been separated in place that don't get to see each other. And I think they're allowed to go home. Like it's like sometimes randomly he'll let them go see their family like at the wall or at the border. But it's like separations like of family members.
Yeah. But I don't see how you can successfully do that. Especially in the context of Gaza.
No. And on a place that's that small.
Yeah, it's just inconceivable. And to concentrate, again, their word, these populations in even smaller bubbles or sectors, or this 3-sector thing that the IDF put out in the leaked map. Which again, let me just bring up here.
Yes, bring it up.
There we go. So we see the divisions of Gaza. Incidentally, there is an additional corridor.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's the Philadelphia corridor?
Well, the Philadelphia corridor.
Philadelphia, yeah.
Is the southernmost corridor in Gaza. It's basically just the Gazan side of the border with Egypt.
I was going to say, it's just got to be the side on the other side of their border.
And that one goes back many years. The Egyptians have a different name for it on their side.
Yeah.
But it has since expanded. It became it was a corridor that pre-existed. But when Israel went into Rafah, which is southern Gaza City, in May, literally a year ago, in May of 2024, they started clearing out to turn the Rafah or to turn the Philadelphia corridor. Yeah, they turned it into a massive buffer zone. And then now they have plans this year for an additional buffer zone, which is north of the Philadelphia corridor. And it's called the Morag corridor. And it's supposed to be just above the city of Rafah, but below Khan Yunis. So in this map, you can see in southern Gaza, you have the city of Khan Yunis, and then you have Rafah at the very bottom.
Yeah.
And so you have, if you can see my mouse on the screen, this down here would be the Philadelphia corridor, which is basically going in 1 to 2 miles from the border with Egypt, is just a desolate, destroyed buffer zone. Probably a kill zone now.
A kill zone now.
Which sounds exactly like
what it sounds like.
And then up here, Khan Yunis, which is I believe the second largest city in all of the Gaza Strip after Gaza City in the north. And so this new corridor called the Morag corridor is between these two areas, so that basically you'll only have a little a bit of Rafah city left that is between these corridors. And the corridors basically become Israeli military buffer
zones. I was going to say, like, and then it's like, aren't they showing that like where Rafah is? Like it's going to all be military area now?
Rafah is basically gone.
Yeah, I'm like, it's gone.
There might be like a bit of some of the city left that's crushed between these two Israeli IDF corridors. But then the main area that they're planning to concentrate Gazans in the south is the Al Mawasi area, which is along the coast, which is where they started to concentrate Palestinians during their first invasion of Rafah, May 2024, so a year ago. And it was this coastal strip that they were trying to push, because if you remember back to the start of the war in 2023, they were pushing Gazans south. And so as everybody was moving south, they all went to go to Rafah. So Rafah was a city with, before the war, had about 250,000 people in it. And then it was home to about 1.3 million going into the spring of 2024, because over 1 million of them were refugees, and it became a massive tent city. And then when they announced their invasion of Rafah, they told them to go to Al Mawasi, which is over on the coast. And it was at that point on the coast where they told them go there, but then they didn't have sewage, they didn't have running
like that
water.
was like when you saw all the tents. Like
that was in Rafah.
That was in Rafah, yeah.
Excuse me. But then the Al Mawasi area didn't have any of the infrastructure, didn't have food, didn't have showers, didn't have the bathrooms, didn't have the sewage, didn't have the running water, didn't have the food distribution. So it was a complete mess. So that, incidentally, is the area where they're like, oh, we'll just use that again. We'll just push people there. But then in this army map, they have identified a new army zone, so a new corridor in the center of Gaza, which has yet to actually be built today. So that's something that we should probably keep an eye on, because we can expect that that'll be carved out probably starting in the next few weeks. The Netzarim corridor up above, this new unnamed yet to be formed corridor, is probably the most famous now of all of these ones, because and certainly one of the most important, because it separates Gaza City from the rest. And so will become a key crossing point, and area of occupation management, essentially. So the corridors are essential to this plan. And even within them, like in this IDF map, these civilian areas are much, much larger than what will be left after this humanitarian.
I was going to say, I'm like, this is just like the start. And I feel like by the end, it'll be one little blue spot.
Like this map, like to put it in a kind of different phrase or framework, this map is the skeleton. And then so you can see where like the joints are. Where the key separation points are. And then as the humanitarian system is being developed and put in place, then each area within it will face further concentration. So you're going to create, filtration zones or humanitarian zones, or these armed residential compounds, camps, and that'll all be within these areas. So it's going to be an ever evolving process of domination, compartmentalization, segregation, militarization, and ultimately managed ethnic cleansing, if not worse.
And do you think this is what's made, like, this new plan, this new leaked map? Do you feel like this is what's made now all of a sudden different countries start to be like, hey, now we got to go harder?
I mean, so the picked up bombings in recent weeks, you're killing like 100 people a day, sometimes more, sometimes a bit less, but the bombings are extreme.
It's extreme. Like,
it's getting back to
attacking hospitals. Like,
regularly. And it was in particular the starvation, the blockade and siege, famine. Because it's now, I think, up to day 80, and it took to about day 72 or 73 before the demands picked up. Like Canada, the UK, and France, the French leaders all issued a joint statement demanding that Israel allow aid in. It was becoming a big issue for them. to bring aid into, or to demand that aid be let into Gaza, so that you don't have starvation appearing on everybody's screens around the world, because that was what Netanyahu said when he announced that he would be letting a little aid in. He framed it not as a humanitarian thing, but he said that I've been talking to like US senators who are the biggest supporters of Israel, and they're saying that they can't support us if we just have images of starving children coming out. So for practical and pragmatic reasons, we need to let a little aid in, just the bare minimum. And Smotrich backed him up in this, and he said, yes, it's just the bare minimum. Just minimal aid, minimal. Then helping the minimal aid get in gets the rest of the world off of our backs, basically, so that we can continue with this plan. But on the very first day of letting aid in, they let in 5 trucks, as opposed to what is actually needed, which is a minimum of 500.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, wasn't it 300 to 500 a day for a while?
It was 5. Well, I mean, during the ceasefire, yes, but prior to the war, it was 500 to 600 trucks per day, and that's before the war began. And it was just like the regular light siege and blockade of Gaza before October 2023, when it became full siege. And since and hundreds were coming in during the ceasefire per day, but the first day they let in 5 trucks, 3 of them with food, including baby food, and 2 just with funeral shrouds. So basically, something to wrap up your dead.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah. And then not only that, but when they were letting in aid trucks, they weren't getting to distribution points. Because as soon as they got in, the Israeli military then stopped them on the other side and held them up. And so all the aid agencies were saying, well, that's great that 80 trucks got let in today, but we haven't seen them.
Yeah.
Because they haven't made it to our areas. And incidentally, all of this is being sold on the basis that they're trying, like, this is the public reason that's being given by Israelis and Americans and others, is that this is all designed to stop Hamas from stealing the aid. Which, incidentally, Philip Lazzarini, the head of UNRWA, the main UN agency responsible for aid distribution in Gaza, has said that Hamas, like, stealing aid is barely noticeable to us. Like, it happened. It's barely registered. It happens so
like
little.
On
the most part, their aid does get ransacked and stolen, mostly by gangs, criminal gangs, or simply by desperate people. Because when you let in less,
starving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And incidentally, there is tons of documentation at this point to show that Israel has actually worked with, or at the very least, tacitly cooperated with criminal gangs in Gaza, because they will literally stand by and watch as criminal gangs ransack aid trucks, and then they just basically facilitate it. There was one event I read about, actually, where there was a massive aid armada that was let in Rafah, and at the very last minute, the Israelis contacted I think it was the UN, and they altered the aid route at the last second, which is not done, because these routes are planned out.
Because it's supposed to be safe.
Yeah, and they said you have to alter the aid route, I think like 10 minutes ahead of it being deployed, and then they altered, and then they were all attacked by these gangs and had the whole thing ransacked. And then the IDF was just like, must be Hamas. So it's
dude.
Yeah, and then, like, incidentally, the ransacking of aid trucks also only really began after Israel started killing and targeting police forces in Gaza, because they decided that police are a legit target, because they called them Hamas. They're not Hamas. They're they're the civil police. They don't go fight a military. They don't engage in terrorist acts. These are just police officers with civil responsibilities inside Gaza. But they were frequently targeted by the Israelis. So either they died or disbanded, and so aid trucks were no longer being guarded by police, which meant that they were being attacked by criminals and also just ransacked by hungry people.
Yeah, like hungry people. Like I would be, if I was a mom in need to feed my kid, are you kidding me? I would be like doing the same thing. Like, I can't even look at some of the photos that come out of those children because it's so, like, it's so insane to me, the fact that they don't like even think that they can be like a baby's Hamas. Like it's like you're not even logical. Like it's like you're so broken as a person and as a society that you actually don't think that innocent people deserve treatment that's well. Like to be that broken as a person, I just am like, what a gross society.
Yeah. Yeah. So
and I did see that Spain's like, I heard Spain announced like sanctions. They're moving
well,
forward with sanctions.
well, Spain called for an arms embargo.
Oh, okay.
On Israel, and that was just today on the 25th. There's a big conference that Spain is hosting. So there is growing pressure.
Yeah,
it's still largely rhetorical,
and it needs to be more. Like this is so
weak. Like the joint statement from Mark Carney, Canadian Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, and Emmanuel Macron, the French president, called for immediate resumption of aid and the end to the bombings, and threatened some targeted sanctions, which would imply, maybe going after the settler extremists in the cabinet or just a certain settler extremists in the West Bank. The British, I believe, are about to sanction Daniela Weiss, the settler woman in the West Bank. They announced that they were also suspending talks on an Israel-UK free trade talks. And I'm just like, okay, that's great. But why were you engaging in those talks?
For like, why were those conversations even happening?
Yeah.
Like, well, you're like also pretending like you're like trying to make it better.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Which is the kind of the standard thing. And so then the EU is now, I believe it's something like 17 of the EU countries are favoring like suspending or reviewing the EU's trade agreement with Israel. You still have a handful, probably like 6 or 7 countries in the EU who are still very much standing by Israel and everything it does. Of course, Germany, and then Hungary, and Austria, and like those more Central Eastern European countries that are like, hey, we like ethno-nationalism.
Yeah, they're like, we cleansing? We know about it.
Yeah, exactly.
They're like, call on us.
Yeah, pretty much.
We will lead.
Yeah. So you are having like growing rhetorical, like some of opposition, some of these things may have practical things if we move there, but like the sanctions, all this needs to be stop the words and start the action.
Like just do it already. Like and I feel like we've been talking about weapon embargoes, and if this conversation's been going on for so long, like do something already.
Yeah, like there needs to be like, not only do any trade talks or agreements need to be suspended, but you need full boycott.
Yeah, like no one should even be like acknowledging them right now. Like it's like they are like donezo. Like it's like
but economic boycott. Yeah, exactly. Diplomatic isolation.
Yeah, like we won't deal with you. Like the approach you took, like I mean, even Russia, we could have gone a little harder on, but I feel like we were harder on Russia.
Absolutely, and
100%. And we isolated Russia so much.
And the sanctions should be like that. It shouldn't be like, oh, we'll just sanction some settler extremist in the West Bank. No, you should be sanctioning the entire Israeli leadership. You should be sanctioning the IDF.
Because I remember when the fear came that like there could potentially be like, some hard times, a little bit of hunger when we were talking about the Ukraine and Russia. Like there was worry there. It was like everywhere. Like everyone was concerned about that possibility. And I feel like no one's even slightly as concerned, and it's like truly happening. Like people are dying from starvation here.
Yeah, they sure are.
Like,
it's an unprecedented, dramatic drop in nutritional health and well-being for the population of Gaza. Like that's
like not an easy thing to come back from. Like just in general, like the psychological damage to this entire population will take generations and generations and generations of people to, I don't even know if it'll ever be like, I don't know. Like, I don't think that can ever just disappear from your population's like heart. Like, it's it's going to cause generational trauma and rifts and bleed into like so many other aspects of their world and culture, because you can't just like let them be as people. Like, I just don't, it's so overwhelming.
And not just psychological, but also even physiological, because especially kids who go through malnutrition and hunger at key developmental stages, they never recover. You know, these are people who will have many severe challenges, disabilities, developmental challenges growing up. And like, because it's hitting them at such a pivotal stage in their development,
brain growth, bone growth.
It's not like if you or I, you know, we're like 38, if we were starved, like, we would suffer, but eventually, like, if food was reintroduced, we could come back and rebuild, you know, blah, 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 depending how much, you know, how long it was going on for. But children and infants and babies, like, they can't, like, this is the time where they need that in order to develop.
It's insane.
So,
and it's just like so crazy to be like, and they're dangerous, so like, let's just treat like it's all as one. Like, we're not even gonna acknowledge the fact that they're days old. We're gonna starve them.
You even had a former member of the Israeli Knesset go on television in the past few days and clarify that all babies are our enemy.
I saw that.
All the Gaza babies are our enemy. It's not just Hamas. They're all the enemy. They all need to go.
And it's like, what are we waiting for? Are we going to wait till we start to hear them say like words like exterminate? Like, are we going to wait for that? Like, are we just going to wait for Netanyahu to finally like openly use that term? And then that's when everyone will be like, okay, now let's do that. Let's do something. Like, it's like, we waited too long for World War II. I feel like we should have learned something from that. We waited too long with Vietnam. We waited too long with even the, like, with everything. With like what's going on in the Congo, it took too long. What's happened in Sudan, it took too long. Like, everything takes too long. So we need to like, it's just got to stop.
Well, we've gone from never again to let's go again.
Right? And now it's like, I feel gross sometimes, even though I know we like, obviously it's like where you and I stand on history, where so many people that we know and talk to, but I still feel gross knowing that this is going to be something that, you know, my son's generation will learn about, his kids will learn about, and then you'll be able to be like, yeah, like I was there. I saw that, like I lived through that. And yeah, you're right. Like, Canada and America did nothing. Because there's no way you can spin this. And it's like, I feel like it's just so insane to me. Like it's so crazy. Like, you can't change history. You can't change facts. You can't change what people are seeing. Like, we see this. It's like literally in our eyes. Like, I think our society, like this time will be also traumatized because the amount of visual things we've seen is so traumatic. Like, and it's like,
absolutely. And that's never happened before.
And then, but I love when people say that to me and they're like, I can't look. It's so traumatic. And I'm like, how do you think the people feel that are experiencing it? Like, like, I know like looking is hard, but looking away is actually like a choice that we need to not be like, if like, I feel like you shouldn't be looking away now. Like, if you're looking away now, it's like harder for me to, I heard someone say something really good the other day about politics. Like, you know, when you have conversations with people and they're like, I don't talk about politics. I don't like to talk about politics. This girl I was listening to a podcast, and she was American, but her parents were both Hispanic, and her dad was from, I think, Puerto Rico, and her mom was from Mexico, I think. And so she's had and she even admitted, like, I have a privileged life, but I don't have, like, I do have the fact that I look different. Like, I have racial inequalities, like, in my life that I experience. So when people say to me, like, politics just aren't, like, I don't talk about politics, like, that's a privilege. Like, to have that stance in general is a privilege. And she was like, so I think it's so important that when people say that, like, that's what's followed up with, like, being like, well, then that's actually your political stance, because right now that means the system's working for you. So you're privileged off it. So you want it to stay this way. And I was like, that's the best way to come back to somebody who says that. Like, it's like uncomfortable for me, or I don't really, like, you know what, I know it's like going on over there, but I don't really want to like talk about it or bring it up, because like, I don't want my kids to hear it like that. And that means that it's working for you right now.
Exactly.
And so it's just so frustrating. Because I think that if people stop making it so comfortable for this to happen, and we started to make it more uncomfortable, like that would be where the change happens.
Yeah. And, you know, a part of that is protest and social disobedience and mobilizing, which is why there's such a strong pushback against that. And not only in fascist America,
but even here.
Even here in Canada, even here right in my city of Toronto, where just this past week they passed a bylaw. The city passed a bylaw which bans protests within, like, I think it's 50 meters of like any religious institution or school, or I think hospitals as well are included, and like clearly designed to target pro-Palestinian protesters, because in the previous year there had been various protests that took place at synagogues, not because they're Jewish, but because these specific synagogues were selling occupied stolen land in the West Bank through auctions. So and this was like an open, like it was very out in the open, like this is internationally illegal. First of all, to own this land, to steal this land, and then to sell it internationally is doubly illegal. And you had actual, like, I mean, you had actual synagogues hosting these auction events to sell this land, and you had protesters show up, including many Jewish organizers and protesters among them, because they were also insulted that places for their faith were being used to sell stolen colonized land. Like, they found that pretty insulting to Judaism. But these laws were passed, and if you look online, like on social media, I can't look at it anymore, just all the comments under the posts praising this, it's everybody saying, oh, good, and thank God, and these people, you know, should never be able to protest these things. Like, go, and while you're at it, you should ban protests in the streets and don't block traffic. And it's just like, it comes from this massive ignorance of what protest and social movements actually do. Because like people would say this all the time, like during the civil rights movement, like, oh, I support black civil rights, but, you know, don't interrupt my lunch. Don't block a bridge that I need to cross to get to work. Like, as soon as you inconvenience me, your civil rights are bottom of the barrel, don't matter. So you're good to go for your civil rights so long as I'm not inconvenienced in my daily route. And that's how most people view social movements and protest movements. The reality, of course, being that nothing happens when people are not inconvenienced. The whole point of civil disobedience is to inconvenience society so that society changes, which is the whole purpose of the civil disobedience and protests. I remember early Black Lives Matter protests before 2020. So like 2016. There was like a big one that happened in San Francisco where I believe they blocked the Golden Gate Bridge for a little while. And I remember seeing people like, I support the Black Lives Matter movement, but don't block a bridge during rush hour. That'll just make people turn against you. And they were like, why don't you just go protest like in somewhere that isn't disturbing people? And I had to look it up, but I pointed out, I was like, these protesters were actually congregated in a park for about a month prior to this event. And how much coverage did that get? None. How much did anybody pay attention to that? Because they weren't inconveniencing anybody.
It's gotta bring discomfort.
Nothing changed. Like, that's the whole point. Civil disobedience is about making the regular functioning of society not function. To make it hold up, to make it seize and stop, to make it inconvenient, so that people actually wake up and pay attention, and that something might change. That's
the point.
And we're actually now starting to see this in Israel itself. Starting to see the emergence of a protest movement that isn't simply about get the hostages back or help our soldiers, blah, 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 but that's actually starting to center Palestinians in Gaza. You have Israeli Jewish protesters holding images of murdered Palestinian babies and children.
Yes.
And they're standing outside IDF recruitment centers saying, don't go kill more kids.
Yeah.
They tried to get to the Gaza border with a protest and were obviously blocked and attacked by police and all this, but they're still very much a minority, but this is new. This is emerging. New. And they're using the word genocide. They're using the terms ethnic cleansing. And like, these are obviously like leftist activists. Yeah,
like it's not small groups, but it's still big.
It's meaningful. And it's a change. It's also something that it's like, finally, we have this voice that's potentially civilizing Israelis from the inside out. You know, it's what's needed. So I think probably that's a good place to
end it. Like, finally we'll end it on like a little, like maybe there's a little glimmer of hope.
Yeah, just something. Well, that's always the thing, right? What was it? Martin Luther King said was the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice.
Yes.
So it's this idea that, you know, the world may be dark. There may be so many horrible things going on, but there are good things, but they lag.
They lag. Yeah.
They're harder to see. They're that glimmer.
They take longer.
Exactly. But it's precisely because they lag behind that maybe means they get the last say, I hope.
Yeah. I agree. No, that's a good one.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody, for listening to this additionally depressing episode on Gaza.
Yes, but really, I feel like it's like this is like also key though, because last week, you know, we really weren't sure where things were going to go, and now it's like the plan's out, it's clear, and now it's just like, you know, if you are wondering what you can do, it's like be loud, like stand up, like talk to your local MPs, like wherever you are, like talk to government.
Do that,
get out
because
there and protest.
The Canadian government too is starting to like the sound they're making is starting to change. And if they keep hearing from people, that sound will grow louder and maybe become action.
I actually email a political leader's office every week.
Oh, good for you.
And I actually, me and the secretary now have quite a nice relationship because she gets all of them. And her opinion has changed.
Nice.
And it's not, and I always come in hot and heavy, but I remind her that I can appreciate, and remind her also that I believe she has a good soul. I always start leading that way. But I always remind them that I see them and I'm watching.
Yeah.
And they answer because they can't not, because it's all the time.
Yeah.
They know I'm watching. It's the truth. When I saw him at a Christmas event in Kamloops, and I walked right up to him and I was like, "Hey, buddy." He knew exactly who I was. And he was out of there.
Is this your MP?
Yeah, that was the Kamloops one. He's
Amazing.
no longer. My last email from them, they're like, "You realize that he's like no longer the acting MP." I was like, "I don't care." Like, I don't care. Like, I feel like you're like writing that out in bold for me to stop.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna, because I see his signs everywhere for re-election. So here, I'm still here. I hate him so much. Frank Caputo. You know me, buddy.
Shout out.
Oh, dude, I saw him at the Christmas train trying to pretend like he like takes donations, and then I walked up to him and I was like, "Bet you like to watch kids starve?" And he was like, couldn't handle it. Him and his wife. Ugh, gross. Trying to, I can't.
Yeah, so do that. Do that.
Yeah. And then it's Christmas post at Christmas time. Sorry, and this is the last bit. But if you really want to go after someone, feel free to go after Caputo. Like, just email him. Just like, he likes to talk about his waistline when he overeats. And what a horrible thing to talk about in the middle of like people just being starved. So I just always like to remind him when he makes those tweets, because I also like to talk to him there as well sometimes. Yeah.
That's good on you.
So if you're looking for something to do, guys,
harass your local MP. I mean, contact your local MP.
Contact. I'm persistent. Somebody say.
Dedicated.
I mean, it's how I got my child. So
yeah.
Dedication. Come on.
And speaking of dedication, for all our listeners, please like, subscribe, share, comment. Like, whatever you're listening to this on, whether you're watching us on YouTube, where you're listening to us on Castbox, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, most podcast players will have a button to either like, heart, promote, thumbs up, whatever it is. Push that. Please, because any engagement with our social media, with our podcasts, wherever they're posted, increase how the algorithm promotes our content.
And gets us in front of more people.
So the more you hit like, the more you comment, the more you share, the more you subscribe, the more our podcast gets promoted by the algorithms that control all of our lives and are bringing us into a dystopian nightmare world. So maybe, so help us defeat these algorithms,
literally,
and promote our content. And thank you very, very much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.
Yes.
In This Mad World is a podcast from empireandeconomics.com, hosted by Andrew Marshall, that's me, and Chelsea G. Music by Francesco Caruso. Please subscribe, like, and share. Visit empireandeconomics.com. Thank you for listening.